Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show, where you'll experience expert analysis and epic discussion on key pillars of the equine industry, including sports, business, hobby, and the horse lifestyle. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years combined living the cowboy lifestyle. The Cowboy Office Show will help you get involved, ask more questions, and create change. We'll keep riding for you as together we learn from the ride already ridden, learn to listen better to our horse, and make our industry better for all. Each weekly episode will take a ride around the industry in less time than you can load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com to receive weekly updates and never miss an episode. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
1985, the year our industry changed, for the better, I might say. It was time to grow up. As our special guest today so eloquently reminded us just a couple days ago, if we were wine, we would be good by now. Fine and priceless, maybe. In the Reining world, 1985 was a major turning point. Over half the current membership probably wasn't even born yet. Another quarter of it wasn't active yet. What was happening in 1985? Ronald Reagan was president of the U.S. Brian Mulroney was Canadian Prime Minister. Interest rates, now listen to this one, interest rates were 12.96% in 1985, and I remember it well. Won't tell that story, but it's okay. Currently, folks, the interest rates are 7.37 according to the U.S. Bank, and they just dropped by about a half a point in the last 15 to 20 days, so everybody just kind of take a breath. We've ridden this one before. It's not that bad. They say everything runs in cycles. Are we turning over our cycle in the horse world? We'll see. Welcome to the Cowboy Office. I'm Brian.
And I'm Jody. I'd like to welcome everyone. You know, the Reining fraternity moved to OKC in 1986. You know, the sport moved from Ohio because growth was in the front window. The I-35 corridor became the new hub for joining the West and the East in the horse show world. The Reining fraternity took the date at OKC that the National Finals Rodeo was in as they moved to Vegas. Well, that was a smart thing that they did, huh? I mean, major change was upon us all. You know, what other major events happened in 1985? 2 Live Aid concerts, and I had forgot about those. Brian, I don't know how you remembered that, right? But one in Wembley Stadium in London, one in JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. They happened simultaneously. 161,000 people gathered at once. John was probably there. But anyway, if those of you who weren't born yet, if you don't remember what Live Aid was, it was a music-based fundraising initiative, and the original event was to raise further funds for relief of the 1983 and 85 famine in Ethiopia. Horse World, 1985. Brian and I were in the first class, as we have the man behind the system with us today, the teacher. He taught us. 1985 was the year the Reining scoring system was introduced to the industry and put in practice, changing the horse show world, the entire Western horse show world, I might add, for the better. We'd like to welcome and introduce NRHA 1994. Wow, Hall of Fame member. That's a long time ago, gentlemen. Mentor to so many of us, non-pro competitor, horse owner, past Minister of Education for the province of Ontario, and most important, our longtime friend, welcome Mr. John Snobelen.
Hey guys, what are you two troublemakers up to tonight?
Exactly.
Talking to you.
You know,
it's been a while.
You know, Brian, I'm shocked. I am shocked that with the thought that you might have been able to get credit in 1985.
I must have known somebody.
You know, I was just thinking about that, guys. When we were talking about fine wine, I'm pretty sure this group is probably going to be Mad Dog 2020 for the duration. So I'm not sure if we're gonna. Yeah, right,
some things just don't get
we
better.
Might just be Mogan David forever. But anyway,
fair enough.
Life is good, gentlemen. John, we are so glad to have you with us.
It's great to be with you guys virtually, but I mean shades of COVID, I guess. But it's great to be with you tonight. It's good.
Well, it's a little bit of modern, you know. I mean, just think of what we could have done in 1985 if we would have had technology like we had.
Boy, I mean, yeah, and in all kinds of different ways. I mean, you know, we're taking advantage of some of it. Maybe we're not taking advantage of some other things that are available to us. But you know, think about those miles and miles of tape we used to have to look at.
Yeah, isn't that true? And the miles and miles that we used to drive across the road to go to meet, to brainstorm, but the miles of tape that, when VHS came out.
Boxes of VH tapes that you'd get in the mail and have to go look. Oh, yeah. Boy. Okay, guys, I'll see you later. That's a bad memory.
And if you're hauling anything for a world title, you used to have to pick up the telephone and call the NRHA office to find out how much money your opposition had won, right? Because there was no way of knowing. I need to know if I have to go show this weekend or if I can stay home. Oh, Lord.
And by call the office, you mean call the basement.
Yeah, Kay, can you please tell me? And she would know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll promise you, she would know. So
She would.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you'd have to stop and hit a phone booth. That was even before cell phones.
No, yeah.
Okay, enough.
All right. Well,
Reining was founded on 3 simple principles in 1966. Good ground, good judges, good purses. Very fundamental. We've talked about it a lot on our show, and so, the 4 founders had tremendous vision. John, you were the brains behind the system. I think we tackled the good judges first. To my understanding, we did judges first. And you're going to talk a little bit about the history. And then came ground, which was precipitated when we moved from the Congress to Oklahoma City. And managing ground became a whole nother chore, but that was second. Now here we are, 50-some years later, and the industry is trying to tackle the third spoke, which is purses.
Right.
And I can't wait to hear from you, because back in the early 80s, when you guys were brainstorming some of this stuff, could you see kind of where we are now?
No, I don't think anyone did. I think what we could see at that time was an opportunity to start on a process of change on what we thought would be a continuum of getting after what good judging meant, what we meant by good judging, and how we went about, kind of achieving that goal. I didn't think we could get it done in one shot. I don't think we did get it done in one shot. But it's interesting, Brian, because I think that one of the things that when you bring in the dirt part of it, what precipitated that was the first year we were in Oklahoma City, and that was a huge shock. We had that wet, terrible ground that had been outside, and there were, I think, barrels at either end to tell you which part of the swamp to avoid going in. And we hired a dirt doctor from Oklahoma State, and then Bob, of course, paid close attention to that, and that was the beginning of professional dirt. I mean, that was really the beginning of it. But it started not because we thought we should learn something or know something. It started because we were in a big mess.
Right.
And
So
the same
how's
thing
that?
is true.
Go ahead. How's that relative to the judging system?
Well, the same thing is true of judging. I mean, we would not have gone to the kind of changes that we went through, and it was, it was a lot of effort by a lot of people to make this happen. But we wouldn't have gone to that effort, I don't think, except for 1983, exactly 40 years ago now. The Reining fraternity was at the Congress, Enterprise Velvet. I went past that pasture on Oswald Road, looked over where she used to stand just a couple weeks ago. But Enterprise Velvet was placed second. Craig won that for charity, and there was some jogging involved, if you recall, and there was subsequently Ben Mears kind of complained a little bit.
quietly. Ben, very quietly. Very quiet.
Very quiet. Ben was known to be quiet. And off we went on a journey to see if we couldn't improve the judging. And, I was young enough and dumb enough that I didn't know that they meant improve, not change. So, and 40 years later, here we are.
Yeah, but now, because 1983 was, and Craig wins it, and that was the first year we guaranteed $100,000 to the fraternity.
That's correct. Yep.
So the controversy
Second place
comes.
pays $27.18 if memory serves.
So that's what two things precipitated. One was the pay differential, but two was the accuracy, because it was trotting out of a couple rollbacks, right?
Oh yeah, for quite a ways.
Yeah. So from 1983 to then 85, actually, and Jody and I have tried to figure out, and we don't know this, maybe you do, Do you know when the very first school was actually held? And you did it, didn't you?
It would have been 84, I think, at Tim Katona's.
In the fall of 84. And that's the one that Jody was talking about, I think,
Yeah.
right?
That was the first one, yeah, for sure. Because I remember going across the Ambassador Bridge and got a call from Tim and saying, "Do you want to use live horses or tape?"
And then
Right.
We were just that prepared, Brian. We were right on the edge.
I hear you. And then a few months later, because it was like January or February, because I was at the one at Willowbrook.
Right.
So which would have been the winter of that winter, the
Yes.
early part of 85.
Yep. So if you think about it, from the time when Dick Pieper called me and said, "Would you have a look at one of the things that he'd come to an agreement with Ben about was we would have a look at our judging standards and see if we couldn't make some improvement." That Dick called me and said, "Would you do that?" And I said, "Sure." And so it was like less than a year, and we had score sheets and a judge's guide, and the rule changes came before the NRHA that year, 1984, that allowed us to get this program going in 1985. And I think 85 was an optional year. I think if I remember correctly, you could use the quote unquote old way or the new way or whatever back then. But so it was pretty quick.
Well, there's two things, and I want to bring them up. One, we've got original judges' cards compared to the judges' card we know today. And then the second is, and I think this is phenomenal, because Jim Willoughby and A General is a big piece. This is how we used to mark, judge, Reining, judge all of horse show stuff. And you and this whole catalyst of change revolutionize officiating into a maneuver by maneuver basis.
Right. Maneuvers didn't exist.
Right. No, we scored from 60 to 80 because 0 was a DSQ. So 60 to 80, pick your number, mark it on the card, take your top 10, we're done, right?
Yep.
So the concept of moving to a maneuver by maneuver basis, bring up the current scorecard if you would, please. And then the second piece, here it is. So this is revolutionary. So what you're telling me is, I'm not sure what you're telling me. Telling me how you got here.
Okay. Well, in a year, that's the astounding part of it. And I was, as you were, I was in my 20s. So that's kind of even stranger when you think about it. But this was a quantum leap. This was a pretty huge thing, industry-wide, because we were questioning the expert opinion. That's what the experts of the day told us.
Right.
And we really changed the job that people perceived to be the job of judging. At the time, before this came along, I remember judging one with, I'm trying to remember who it was, Chuck Smith, I think. And your old friend Bob Anthony showed to us, and there was two of us judging that particular day. It was in Pennsylvania somewhere. And Chuck was checking the bridles. So I marked him, and Chuck marked him, and they called the score. And when Bob was dropping his bridle, he gave me a glare, and I don't know whether you remember, but Bob could give you a glare. And so the next drag, I said, "Chuck, what was Bob upset about?" He said, "I told him I marked him a 74." Well, he marked a 142, and it was two 71s. But back in the day, there was no way to check that.
Right.
There was no way to check that. All you had was the total score. You didn't even have individual judges' scores.
Right.
So this was a whole new level of accountability, and there was sure enough a lot of resistance to it. But your question wasn't that. Your question was, how do we get here?
Well, I find there's a couple things. One is the philosophical approach and the precipitating, I get it, that enterprise velvet, the fraternity, first and second. We've been having that whole conversation for almost, 60 years. We don't have it as, it's not as bad in today's time, because I think, this is my view, the data would say this, we are selecting winners very well in today's time. We are not distributing purses very well, and we falter or fall short on cutoff lines to making finals, which is finer distinctions. We'll get to that in a minute.
Right.
But the philosophical, strategic functioning of needing to make the system better, you ended up changing it, which made it to the better, and doing that in a short period of time, but going from the expert opinion to an accountable maneuver by maneuver that actually makes the skill of a reining horse more equal across the whole pattern as opposed to dominated by the stops at the end.
Right. Yeah, that was that was pretty clearly the objective. How we got to that? It's not. I mean, it may be historically interesting to people, but probably about 3 people. What's important about it is informing what we might do from here. So if you kind of look back on what that journey was, what are the critical steps in it, it might help inform where to from here. And so and I'm glad you brought this up, Brian, because one of the really important things was to say, what do we want? Like, what's the result we're after? And, there was a degree of predictability and accountability on reining after reining. That was what we were after. We wanted this to be replicable. And so we defined the role of a judge differently than the judge had been defined before. The judge was an expert before this, and we said the judge is a trained observer, knowledgeable in the standards and generally accepted equine practices, I think, or showing practices. So we clearly defined what that judge's role was, and it was a different role than just being an expert. And that gave us latitude to go to work on how do humans observe things, and what works and doesn't work for people over the course of a day. And that was kind of the background thinking behind what became the system. And there was everyone had some way of surviving judging or reining, and I don't think very many of us were happy about it. It was really hard to do when you just pulled the number. And it was really hard to do when your job was to place that class, which was the thinking at the time. You had to place the class.
Yep.
But if you just have to observe it and mirror that run perfectly, that takes a little bit of that stress off, and now you can do your job. And I won't ramble on forever, but the thing was built on there was a simple insight that I think BH had back then, and I know lots of other people had something to say about it, that said that you could judge 80% or 90% of reining by going good, bad, average.
Right, which is the paragraph, and that was my point that I was making, because A general is 1, but B 1 in the rules of this game, and I'm assuming you wrote that. Is that a fair statement? Did you write this?
I wrote pretty much all of that first thing, except for A general.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you take the sport, you can take it, and I just find this fascinating because there it is.
By the way, I
will be on
hated 0 to infinity, just so you know. I thought it was a positive numeric scale,
right.
but then never mind that. Carry on.
I think that was added later. The 0 to infinity was added. I believe that was
Yeah,
Mario Beaujolais' edition, if I remember correctly. The 0 to infinity. Yeah,
I think we should blame Mario. I don't think
Okay.
it was, but we should blame Mario anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
had to be a Canadian.
I-
So, but it's phenomenal because when you break it, the sport of reining, and what is it? And this is it. Being judged on a half-point increment, maneuver by maneuver, 0 denoting a correct with no degree of difficulty. So you put those 2 paragraphs, A general and B1 together, and there's the sport of reining.
Yeah, and that, so without, there's the lesson to be learned here is when you have those defining stepstones, you can start to build a foundation. And those are the things that we're building this on.
It was a tremendous foundation. And it was Brian. I'll tell you this because John was working so hard about this, and there's all kinds of questions that are coming into my little pea brain here right now. And number one is we have the professionals committee, now we have judges committee, and at that point in time, John, because we were first getting cards, we didn't have a separation between those two, did we? It was just sort of like the professionals. If it was Dick and if it was Loom and if it was whoever else were offering input, and you just had to sort through it yourself. Was Dale a pretty big part of that too at that time?
Yeah, Dale helped a lot with This is kind of when I
Wilkinson,
got to
I
know
might
Dale
add,
real
by the
well.
way, for those of you that are users that are
Yeah, I'm
watching
sorry.
that don't know who he is, right? Because that's possible, right?
Three-quarters of the
Right.
membership don't know. So
Right.
yeah.
Anyway, Dale was real helpful in lots of ways. So we had the top 20 riders back then rather than a professionals committee, but it was basically the same function. And we had a judges committee, but it was about a couple of years we'd had it, and gosh, I was chairing that stupid thing. So how important could it be? I give you, we started the judges quote unquote test to get a judge's card, I think 2 years before this, in 1981, maybe. Because I went to it and we had it at, Dick was in Lucama, we had it in his tack room, and the VCR did not work. So we had a couple of libations and chatted about judging and went home. And that was the.
And everybody got their card.
Of course,
right?
yeah. So I barely passed it. I only had the one drink, but so there was a lot of there was a baseline there. We got a lot of input, and the people resisted this thing pretty hard, especially the people who were doing really well.
Right.
Because anytime you do a change, people who are doing real well are going to resist it. That's just normal. That's just human behavior. But they all contributed to it. I mean, BH, Loom, all the folks back then, Dale, people who had a great influence, Bobby Mack, folks who had an influence on the sport at the time, eventually got behind this. There might have been some resistance at the start of it, but it took about a year to overcome that completely, and then they got behind it. Bob told me one day, he said, I got NRHA underwear. I'm NRHA adoptions, I'm going for it, so. And Dale was our special advisor to the Judges Committee. We made that title for him, and he sprinkled his magic dust on the program, and if he hadn't done that, we may not have gotten anywhere.
That was, I do remember how tough that was to get, everywhere you'd have a conversation at the Congress when this was about to, take place, and exhibitors, guys that weren't in top 20 riders, myself, we were like, you didn't know whether to trust it or not. If you wanted to be a judge, you didn't know whether you could judge or not, but you didn't know whether you could use it or not. It was, and that wasn't as difficult as it was. We had, Brian, I went to a judges school in Nashville with John many, many, many years ago, and he had
I actually recovered from that one 2 weeks ago.
And right.
The good
I
news is
remember
you
that he
recovered.
had Clark and Dick assisting, and so it ran the old black and white VHS tape and made all the noises and all that good stuff. And John got up in front of the group of judges and he said, "Look," he said, "now the thing about this is," he said, "there isn't any middle of the road," which we can get to later. But he said, "This is either a plus half or it is not. It is a 0 or it is a plus half or it is a minus half. There isn't any of this in between." And he tells this whole room and he gives his spiel, and it's trying to convince guys not to use this, come into the new system. This is what it is, okay? Dick, Clark, mark one for me, will you? I stand up there. "Well, Dick, I don't, that could almost be a plus." John, he just slaps his forehead like,
That's a strong 0 right there. Yeah.
It was really pretty funny because I knew actually how hard John was working at this, right? I knew, and it was like, oh, my backers were, they pretty much failed. It was like, oh.
And you got to remember back then, I remember, we had a Reining here, and I'm still at the home farm. We had a Reining here, and I hired two guys to judge it. One of them was Merlin, who had just gotten his card at Katonis. And, remember, he wasn't very well known, to say the least, by NRHA. And Alan, our soon-to-be Judges Committee chairman after I was. So, and he wasn't going to use this system. And I don't want to tell tales out of school, but he came up to me at the drag, and he said, "Well, I guess it's working." He said, "But the first horse, he knew Marlin couldn't judge because he'd used a half point on his first horse, and he only used half points to break ties. So, you know, the mindset of where we were to where we got to.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And give Alan Mitchell's credit. I mean, he got there like on 2 drags.
Okay.
He went,
Quick.
okay, this
Yeah.
works, and let's do
Yep.
this. But you know, it was a pretty huge shift in the mindset of a judge.
Yeah. Mindset, philosophical, catalyst to the change, all of those is those are all powerful. But let's bring that forward to today's time, because everything that we're talking about in the 80s, a lot of that is still relevant in today's time. But the industry is not standing still. And so now I find this, I love this part. And so that there might be a few hundred of us that have NRHA underwear. The rest of them don't yet. But anyways, that might be something that new revenue stream for the NRHA. But I want to bring it forward to today relative to officiating. And first question is, are there lessons from the past, from that time, managing change, changing mindsets that would be relative in today's time? Because this is my view. I think Jody shares some of this with me. We have some great conversations and debates around some of this, but the point is change is upon us again. But we don't know how to do that. And so the catalyst to it, and you've said a couple great ones. So the question is, are there lessons from that time that would be applicable in today's time?
Yeah, I think there are lots of them. But I think you first have to kind of realize that nothing fails like success. So, you know, against all odds, this particular judging program or system was successful. And that's inevitably sets up its failure because you then start this cycle of improvement that inevitably hits the dock. I mean, you get to the place where you have to change it again. That's just normal. It's a normal way of anything evolving. So nothing fails like success. And if it had failed a little, it would have been easier to get in there and change it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things so there's a couple of things, if you look at how we set this up, it wasn't the clean slate, perfect system looking in 1984 or 3 or 5 or whenever. It was a compromise. Now, it was a compromise way out there, you know, on the edge of, like, you can imagine the debate about having scribes. I mean, like,
Yes.
So it was way out there. It was craziness, actually, at the time. But it was still a compromise. I mean, we kept the scoring basically between 60 and 80.
Yes.
Correct.
We worked on that familiar formula because at the time we thought that more change than that would not be accepted by the industry. I mean, we would push the thing over the edge. We said that you know, we wanted our judges to mirror the event. We wanted them to be, you know, trained observers. We said that our judging was as good as our ability to train judges. But the truth is, we didn't really know how to evaluate a judge in 1985.
No.
I mean, we could
I don't
call
think
the
I don't
herd
think we
into
do today either.
yeah, we could call the herd into, you know,
Yeah.
80-20, because that's kind of how it breaks down. But I don't think we really knew how to evaluate a judge in those days. And I'm not, you know, I don't know now. Perhaps there's better evaluations, but I think there's room to take there. There's things to learn about that. Mm-hmm. We didn't do an awful lot of work on how people see things and how they work with things. We did some of it. We used those judges' schools as a way of incorporating the knowledge of the people who were in the room because they all had judging experience of some kind. So we learned a lot in the course of a few years, but we didn't have any money. None. We didn't have any tools. So basically we designed something that we could do with no money. And we did the evaluations of judges as well as we could without, you know, again, any money or any real knowledge. And we haven't made the kind of inroads you'd hope you could make with the technology that's available today and some of the science that's available today in helping judges evaluate where their weaknesses might be and how to work on those weaknesses. I don't think we've got a way of doing that yet that would satisfy me or maybe most people. So I know NRHA's done a lot of work on this kind of thing, but those are the places where you could really make advances, and they're not going to be made kind of because the system sort of works.
Right. Well,
yeah, I mean,
Joe,
I obviously this, the system that was, that you came up with, John. Obviously, when we first started this show, I said, the entire Western performance horse industry adapted it. That's how you can tell it worked. Nothing. I mean, it's like everybody. It doesn't matter if it's a trail class now, if it's a Western pleasure, if it's ranch rail. We're using a scoring system because guess what? NRHA were starting to get the right checks to the right people, and they were perfectly clear with their scoring. They posted their score sheets. They didn't try to hide anything, and they said, look, here's what we marked it, and we can defend it. And that's why everybody else goes, hey, let's do that. But now, like I said, with the way that, it doesn't matter if you're driving a car. If you drive one in 1985 and you drive one now, they drive differently. The horses certainly drive differently. And does not the system need to drive differently?
Yeah, I think you can do it. You could look at it, and it's not up to. I don't want to. I'm not here to critique anybody's work, and B, because I think a lot of people who are really good folks are working on bits and pieces of this, and everybody always wants it to make it better. But I really had the feeling in 2002 that our system had run its course. So Futurity 2002, the judges got it right. It was all fine. The payouts went the way they should have gone. But when Wimpy's Little Step made that second rollback, I said, we're out of numbers.
we can't get there.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Well, we're kind of maxing out the range that we had to work with, and we were going to run into the problems, Brian, that you articulated at the beginning of this. We're kind of bumping up into the numbers, and judges do retreat when you bump up to that ceiling. It's kind of natural. So we have to think about this from a different point of view. Maybe it's time to go 0 to 10 on a maneuver or whatever. Where there's simple fixes to that part of it, but more complicated is how do we connect the head and the heart. You talked about the judges seminars we did back then. We were trying to get people, make it as simple as we possibly could, because our job was to get this so it could be replicated in dust and dirt on the average Saturday anywhere.
Right.
So we got that done. Now we got to connect that heart and head part so that we allow judges to look at this thing and see it analytically, but also be moved by it. Because when you get to the top end of it, whatever your scoring range is, you're being moved. This is an exciting event. It's an event we love. There's got to be some heart in that marking if you're going to separate horses at the top part of what is an art form. And I'm not sure that we know how to do that and do it in a way that's replicable. And that's where I think the ground is.
I would beg to differ. We do know how to do it. It's about being willing to do it. I would tell you there are enough people in the industry that, and it wouldn't be like a convention, but there's plenty of them. So the point is, and you made a powerful statement. There's a few of them. One is evaluating judges, and we do not evaluate judges. We do a minimum base standard to keep a license. That's it. Yes, we have this silly rating system that means nothing, has nothing to do with competence of an official. It's a arbitrary system, which is a model to a truck or a car, which is how much leather you got on the seats. That's all that stuff means. So evaluating is one of them. Two is the depth of competition, the knowledge and technology and skill and training horses. Our breeding, our genetics, and our training has come so far that those pressures on the officiating system is what's pushing us. It's now 75s to 77s to if you're going to leave the barn and you want to go win, you got to have that level of horse. There's no secret there. Are we pushing the envelope to the 80s? The answer is yes. if you look at the rest of the numbers, where is the industry? The industry used to be just underneath 70. Now it is significantly over 70. That 71 to 73 is pretty normal. So the answer on you just brought up a different one. Are there many different options by which we can advance the system to make more fine distinctions on the way up and down the art of the officiating of the art of horsemanship? And that answer would be yes, and I think they're readily available. It's the will to want to do it, and I believe that the economics are going to push us to either get on or get off. That's what I believe, and we're going to bring that up in a minute, because if we talk, just bear with me. Travis, bring up the economic graph. This is a 2-year graph of the top. Now, you made reference to the top 20 fraternity riders, John. This is a graph of categories 1 through 10, sport of reining the last 2 years. You're talking about $3.5 million being won in the top 10 riders. 20th is last year won 113,000, and the right-hand side of this graph is only through October, published in October. The data would be through September, so you still got a quarter and a month of dollars to be earned, which is the peak of our industry. But you're talking about $500,000 at the top of this list and 70 to 100,000 on the 20th of that list. That's like, we used to dream about that, right? So, well, now comes my point would be the pressure to get that right from a sport, because it's not about individuals. It's about the tools that you made reference to, and it's about changing, adapting that system so that it can be moving with the rest of the industry, because fundamentally it hasn't moved.
Yeah, you can do some structural things that would probably help, that would definitely help judges evaluate the performance and the standard that's there now in 2023. And if you look ahead, it's only going one direction.
Right.
So yeah, we could make a model for evaluation that would better fit that horse. Absolutely, we could. But we'd also have to do a better, or begin to take the steps doing a different kind of job on how we evaluate judges, how we help judges learn to be better judges. I'm talking
Yes.
to two guys who know this better than anybody. It's a lonely business out there behind that pencil.
Yep.
And it's not about attacking people for making mistakes. We've had plenty of opportunities to do that. It's never, ever worked. But really having a trusted way to evaluate where you're, what you're doing, what you're seeing, what's happening with you, how you be a better observer and a better mirror of what's happening in front of you. So there's room to take on those fronts. And your question was about what's the catalyst. Nothing fails like success, Brian. Industry's doing just fine, thank you very much. There's some more prize money. You just got a graph here. It says things are going well.
They're going very well, without a doubt. But one of the things that Jody and I talk about, and another question is, I find this fascinating because the sport, one was how we hire judges. Answer this question: why was the judge's fee created in the sport of reining?
Well, it was created because there was an imbalance on the 50% retainage on the entry fee for the horse show and the added money. It was there as a way of a horse show getting more money out of an exhibitor. That's pretty simple.
Okay. Well, they're doing well at that.
Yes, they are.
Which is not relevant to hiring high quality officials.
No, and there were some thoughts over the years, and I'm sure there's been many since I've not been involved, and that's quite a long time. But we should have judges assigned by NRHA, or NRHA should be involved in the selection of judges, and in the preparation of judges and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And I'm sure that we're somewhere on that continuum right now. But it costs money to do those programs, and it's money the industry. The cost of developing a really good judging system right now is not onerous for an industry the size of NRHA. It was very onerous in 1983.
Right.
But now I don't think that's not a reasonable barrier.
Right.
Interesting. It really is. John, when connecting the head and the heart that's super interesting to me, because any of us that have had a passion for a reining horse, sometimes sitting in that chair, I have a difficult time separating my head from my heart, because sometimes my heart wants to take me in a direction that my head says, don't you do that, right? There's two sides to that story too. So and this is just a question, it's not a trick question, I just want your opinion on this, just because we've had this discussion. I chaired that committee for 5 years, I know what this is like. Do you feel like an official, at no matter what they do, is better off having been a part of that sport? In other words, a reining horse judge, is he better, or he or she, because we got some great girls, he or she better off having trained or had a background in this? Or can we teach someone who is off the street that's an intelligent person to learn to do this job?
I'm not sure, probably anything's possible, but it is almost impossible to take someone who doesn't understand from the wranglers down, or the cinches down, I guess now, but doesn't understand from a butt in the saddle point of view, degree of difficulty. It's really hard to translate that. And I think that in my experience, and again, I'm just an old guy, kind of drool a lot, whatever. But the hardest part is when people start. The hardest thing to get people to do is to recognize degree of difficulty. That's the hardest piece. Consistently, over time, recognize degree of difficulty. This is not an easy thing to do. And it's particularly not an easy thing to do with the grace and balance and speed that people are doing with now.
The control is being exhibited in today's time the way Jim Willoughby wrote it in '66. Yeah. We are seeing it.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal.
Yes, and the horses are, and we could, you don't. I mean, if you just play a reining play Enterprise Velvet's finals run and tell me where that would place today. I mean, it's not that the horses are much better, we're much better, the exhibition's much better, all of it's much better. But the degree of difficulty that folks are demonstrating, and that's kind of takes me back to 2002. I thought the degree of difficulty we were seeing in 2002 was outside of the range of what we were prepared to mark and evaluate. And I think it was evaluated properly and well done. But we were just pushed the edge of it. And so, directly answer to your question, I don't think that you can do that. I think you have to have some fundamental understanding of what is difficult to be able to recognize it.
Well, let me take us, because the magical piece in officiating in our sport, this is my interpretation. What you're talking about is the very fine subjective analysis of an expert, making a fine distinction on the quality of a skill, of the art of horsemanship. And we don't want to lose that or remove that, but we don't want that to be the dominant factor across the entire discipline of the sport. And so it's the shift of making objectiveness being more dominant first, and then allowing the space for your subjective expertise to make that fine distinction.
Yeah,
and I would tell you that 3 half points aren't enough. That's the bottom line. Now, you can say, what do you want to do? And I'll give you a list of options, but 3 half points isn't enough.
Yeah, we can go through the math, and we can figure out a math of how to do that. I think more about what's the human side of it, and how does, because I think the math of it we can get right. We can get that range better than it is now. Now, how do we get people ready to use it, and how do we train them to use it, and how do we take this thing that is a subjective event and use more objective stuff to free up that subjective evaluation, not to constrain it. And I think that's what you're talking about. And I know exactly what you're saying, Jody. And if you're judging and it's, 95 degrees or it's -3 or whatever it is, and you're kind of getting through the day, you're probably not using a lot of that subjective stuff. But when you're in a contest that pays the kind of money that Brian just showed us, you better be able to use that.
Absolutely.
And that's the balancing that I think we need to do a lot of work with people to see how do we help them establish that link in a way that's useful.
Absolutely.
Because you never did get rid of that subjective thing. You might have been trying to coax it back in a corner a little bit,
Yeah,
but it came up.
absolutely. No, there's no
sure.
question about that. I mean, and like I said, the people that don't actually understand what it's like to sit and mark that show or mark that rating. You said it can be a lonely world. That's for sure. And if you sometimes there's just so many things that go into that show, into that 5-judge system, into a 2-judge system. If you're by yourself, I always maintain that 99% of the time people don't make mistakes on purpose, right? I mean, you're silly and so if you treat someone like that mistake is, it's, forget it. We've got to move on. We have to figure out how to get you to be a better judge. I may agree with you totally. So.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way, but originally I think part of our challenge was to get folks where it was okay to make a mistake.
Sure.
Because inevitably you do, and the good news about 8 maneuvers is you only have your mistake's a lot smaller, right?
Well, and the beauty of a 5-judge system, and I find this, it's true in a 5-judge system, because as long as that mistake is an outlier, it's not going to count. And that was phenomenal work that you guys did back then to even think of that. And I know some of the stories on why we drop highs and lows is different than the actuality of what it produces. But what it really does is capture the most accurate piece, because those 3 in the middle over large volume are very accurate. That's true in today's time.
Well, the math, gets. I mean, we went back and looked. I don't know who's done it recently, but we went back and added them all together and did. When we came up with 5 judges and those 2 in the middle, we did a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
But it is a comforting thing for a judge, and it's comforting for an exhibitor. So it
Right.
made sense from an industry point of view.
Yeah, because it just removes the one opinion. So a conglomerate is always better. More brains is better than one, yes?
Sometimes.
Yeah, right. Sometimes that can be the case. Oh,
So your question really, Brian, back to the beginning, is what's the catalyst that takes you to whatever's next? That's not an improvement on what we've got now, but something entirely different. Or
You think?
well, I think different enough that it's not just adding increments. I think if you're going to do that, then let's push this thing a little bit further and say what do we need to do to have the investment that you need to have to do a better job with judges, period. Because if you don't work on the instrument, it doesn't matter what kind of tool you hand them. You've gotta be able to do things that help those folks that have to do that. And you and I know it's a difficult job. I mean, Jody's
No.
not aware of that. You and I know.
that's
But
no, absolutely.
Go ahead,
That's the
Joey.
case, and when you're talking about that, and I think Brian's got some notes about this. I don't want to jump ahead of our schedule, even though we're kind of flying by night on our script here, which is what's way fun. But yeah,
There's a
the
script?
yeah, right. The stuff that the stuff that's supposed to keep us in time here, right? But there's always been that issue with. There's always going to be someone that's a better trumpet player than the other guy is, right? And there's always going to be someone that's maybe going to be, I think that people reach for that experienced judge that they are confident in and over again. So how do we, that's another good question, because we've asked ourselves that same amount of time, how do we give that young and up-and-coming person, because there is, NRHA's Judges Committee will, and we'll get to that later too. They have a system that they use to appoint judges for their major events, but otherwise these huge shows with great amounts of added money, they're able to pick their judges. So how do we give that young guy that's coming up a chance to sit in that chair with those experienced judges?
So you've been a judges committee chairman. I mean, not a very successful one, let's face it. But anyway, so you know what the job's like, and at some level, horse shows have got to put together a set of judges that they think are going to appeal to exhibitors. Right. So there's a part of this that's a little bit of a fashion show, and you'll know that most exhibitors don't really know how competent a person is or is not over the course of a horse show.
No.
Not most.
Oh, yeah, right.
Most
all of them don't, right?
All right,
yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So that's the dilemma, that someone can be very, very popular for a lot of reasons, be a great horse person, whatever, and maybe not be as good at evaluating horses as you'd want them to be. And as a judges committee chairman or person working in that capacity, you kind of have to know what somebody's resume looks like and who's ready to move up and who's not ready to move up. And so quantifying that might be in something other than what you learn from going over a person's body of work might be helpful. Mm-hmm. The other thing that might be helpful is maybe there needs to be, NRHA's got an education and judging program together now. There's some staff support to it, and there has been for a period of time, and I think that's all great. But maybe you need to take the next leap forward, which is to separate that from the reining horse side of it and do it for the entire industry, so you have a bigger cash available to resource it the way you'd want to resource it, because it costs money to do it.
Yep. So you bring up a very interesting point, and the point is change the system as opposed to just making it better. And my question to you would be then, and Jody and I have been talking about this a lot, because the industry has tried for 60 years to standardize itself from the bottom to the top. And I would say in today's time, stop trying to do that and start addressing the industry in the distinct categories that it would be. And you bring up a valid point, because if you change the officiating system, and fundamentally, and the point's this, playing the game at the bottom should be easier and simpler than it is at the top. And that's a piece of what I'm asking you this. Is that a piece of what you make reference to when you say change the system? It's outlived itself.
Yeah, I think, look, I remember when we had added limited non-pro, Ryan. I mean, that's,
yeah.
I am a driller, I mean, and I can remember some dumb Canadian guy at the board saying, wow, why do we need another class? We got amateur and open.
Right.
I mean,
right.
It's changed. And you want to be able to, I think, have people participate in reining at the place where they can participate. And hopefully help them move to wherever, to the next place, hopefully, if that's what they want to do, and if they, got the resources to do it. It's a different challenge. And you can't pay attention to, I think it's probably not a good idea to pay attention to one end or the other. But for sure, we've learned this one thing, that those amazing futurity runs, those amazing, opens, that, those wonderful, wonderful, wonderful classes help feed the entire thing. And if we don't get those right and don't continue to get those right, then you're a club again.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I didn't answer your question, which I'm very good at. As you know, I was trained politically, so they don't call it.
Yeah.
They call it question period. Not answer period.
Way to keep a foot on either side of the fence there, buddy. Right? Yeah. Thanks for your opinion.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good of you to notice
right?
that one. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and this is just because we have a lot of people that watch this, and Brian and I, the one thing about it is we always speak candidly, and you and I and Brian can talk about judging, and I would tell people this. I said there's nothing. I tell my fraternity judges, if I'm monitoring a major event for NRHA, I'd say, look, these guys have won millions. They're riding $100,000+ horses. We don't need to help them. we've got an Adequan pen over there that's very difficult to show in. It's long, it's narrow. We've got guys that have been hauling all year long in affiliates. We've got some horses that aren't very nice. And you know what? If you're in doubt, go up. Because you know what? There's nothing more depressing when someone spends $10,000 to go to a horse show and they get marked a 62.5. And I'm not trying to carry them to a 70, but I'm saying, you know what? You're going to get your checks are going to go to the right people. It doesn't matter if you've marked them a 72 or if you've marked them a 69. So that, no matter where we're at, because this is an art form, do you think that that's always going to be a part of judging a reining horse?
I think, look, I think that I think the tendency when you're training in this sport, and I think it's every sport, is it's easier to train the negative than it is the positive. So you end up with people who are looking for the negative because that's what you've trained them to do. That doesn't mean that you don't see penalties and that you don't,
Right.
It's easy to see bad because bad's easy to do. But it does mean that you can be more generous than always looking for what's wrong. And what happens with judges is they don't want to be tricked. God forbid they miss that, I don't know, canter departure, or they miss a, whatever. They don't want to be tricked. And you'll see people on, I'm going back years ago, so pardon me for
go.
that. But you could have invited somebody to your program that's a little
Right.
more current, let's face it. But anyway, but when you get into that, excellent place, and you have two excellent maneuvers in a row, you'll start to hear from judges, well, his left ear twitched a bit on the way down there, and it's because there's a fear of that generosity. And there can be a fear of that generosity when somebody does a circle, for instance, in that pen that's not so good, does a circle that's good and has a little bit of degree of difficulty, and kind of leaving it on a zero is just easier to do. It's easier to defend if we put our judges in a defensive mode. So this is not easy. It's not easy to do, and it's not easy to stay positive, and it's really not easy to do it 8 hours or 9 or 10 hours a day. But if you don't stay positive, then this is a really awful job.
You just said a powerful statement, and it was it's hard making, and this is my view, the biggest pressure on the officiating system in today's time is making the hard, excellent calls over and over. It was easy when there was only one or two horses. There's now, we just had an event, the 100X event, 2 months ago in Tulsa, blah, 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 blah. But here's the point. This is true. 48 horses out of 150 were all capable of marking over 220. It took a 220 and a half to go to the finals in their 4-year-old derby. Well, getting those horses to the finals was the easy part. Separating those horses for the paycheck was the hard part. And those calls are hard. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And I would tell us that as an industry, it's a big area that needs a lot of resource and work, which would go into continuing education, official development, all the rest of that. And so that's exactly what you're talking about.
We're not experts on it. There are experts that could help guide us. There's been a lot of research done on this by a whole lot of subjectively judged events. We were on the forefront of it at one time. I don't know where we are relative to others now, but a sense of curiosity about how do we help prepare people to do that hard job in the best way possible. And then let's give them some more room. Let's give them more room than a half point.
So let me go back, and just because I enjoy asking you really difficult questions, right? I mean, this is really fun for me. So the horse business, and it's any part of the horse business, John. I've mentioned this on this show before, but it's self-serving, right? So it's natural for a person to want what's best for themselves, which is how in hell can I make more money than I'm making right now? So if this judges system, back in the past, it was the same thing in 1983 too. If this is going to make me more money, I'm all for it. And if it's not, then I don't want anything to do with it. But so when we're talking about and when we talk about changes that we need to make, but because this is self-serving and not just, and I'm just talking about, you're always going to have someone that's going to be defensive about a change, right? I mean, that might mean that you would say you know more about this than I do, and I don't want that to happen. So, I mean, it's human nature, it's given, and especially in the horse business, you know how that is. So would not separating this, the judges program, perhaps make that a little bit easier to coach these guys if it's not involved directly with an association, with AQHA or with NRHA or with NSBA, or I'm talking about judges.
You're talking about an independence,
right?
An independent system.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Is that what you're talking about, Jody?
And rather than not, this is the spot.
Well,
I'm just asking.
What do you think,
we
John?
looked at that in '83, in '84. I was really curious about what we could do. We were looking for expertise that we did not have. When it was the ground, we called a dirt doctor, right? So who's the person who can tell us about humans and evaluations and what they can observe and all that stuff? And so we really dove headfirst into that. This started an entire lifetime inquiry for me into change, leadership, and courage. Those are the three pieces that I just spent the rest of my life chasing that cat. You can so we looked at separate organizations, some externalizing this, and the first thought was, let's go to universities. They have judges teams and stuff like that, and we had a quick look at that and looked underneath the hood and went, nah, I ain't gonna
That's not it, right?
For a lot of reasons. Because the part of the university that we really wanted to access wasn't the part that they would want us to access. Right? We weren't interested in equine science, we were interested in humans.
Right.
The advantage to externalizing it is that you get to be able to bring in a lot of other groups that have the same kind of common issues. Any subjectively judged event has those issues. And so you begin to build an expertise that you can do across a broader range of places. And I think from a judge's point of view, you're not going to church, you're going to school. Because when you go to an NRHA event, an NRHA school, you're going to church.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
well
It's just
put.
the way that is. So
Yep.
yeah, I think there's room for that. I mean, I don't know whether NRHA would be interested in that or not, or whether that's something that people would think was a good idea, but there's
Well,
possibilities for it, sure.
Does it? Well, of course. And the rest of that question is, does it have to be the NRHA?
No, of
And
course
the
not.
answer would be no. Are there other factors and other ways can the sport? I had a friend, a very good friend that we all would know. I won't use his name, but he made this statement to me, and it has stuck like a fly on a manure pile. And the point is this, and it was back when the NRHA was going through the FEI, all that stuff, and we were going to get a divorce, and we did, blah, blah. But I was very concerned for the sport of reining and the international structure. And the point was, and so I was having some conversations with leaders in that point at that time. This is the statement that was said to me. We will always be riding reining horses. Does it have to be the NRHA? The answer is no. Could there be other, whatever? FEI is different. USEF is different. I'm not trying to pick an organization. I'm not having that debate. It's not about organizational function. It's about rules, regulation. It's about how does the sport function? And here comes the rest of it, because if you look at all modern sports, I don't care if it's international or domestic, they have different entities serving the different parts of the sport, from the bottom, from flag football and t-ball, all the way up to the MLB. The MLB is not running t-ball. They're not. So that's the rest of that story. Do you got to take on
I think that's true. I think NRHA has got a really important, and has historically had a really important role in this art form, and in the very best this art form can be. That's always been its role. But But that doesn't mean there's not room for others. Almost certainly doesn't. I'll give you a classic example, Brian. When the futurity moved to Oklahoma, some idiot who was on the board from Canada wrote a thing in the Rainer about why we were moving it, and the financial thing, and that did not make the folks at Ohio State very happy. And so they thought they would finish NRHA, they'd have their own futurity, and that would be the death of NRHA. And there were a lot of people who thought that would be the death of NRHA. What ended up happening, though, was we have a really good futurity in Oklahoma, and we have a really good futurity in Ohio, and everything's fine. Thank you very much. So yeah, no,
I hear
the
you.
more the better.
But it leads us, yes, the more the better. And I hear you loud and clear, but that's where the frustration comes in, because it seems like in today's time, they're trying to keep that control as opposed to letting the flower blossom and have more is better. I would take you down the entire path from show production to date sanctioning to rule enforcement to rule application, amateur versus non-pro, the youth, the young riders, I can go down all of those, which was my point about a sport that should have different entities serving the different segments, because what we hear all the time is, where's the fun? There's very little fun because the economics are way up there and the pursuit to win is high. Okay, fine, so let's separate those.
Well,
Just saying.
If the objective is to be the pinnacle of the performance horse industry, if that's the objective, and I think that's probably not wordsmith right, but it's somewhere in there. Then NRHA has things that they have control over and things they have influence over, and the influence becomes more important than the control at some point. Because if you try to control it, you can only constrain it. So that doesn't mean that NRHA's role as an influencer of that pinnacle of performance horse isn't really, really critical. It's just different than having to control it all.
Interesting.
I hear you.
Right.
Wisdom at its best.
You're getting what you pay for.
I've been paying all my life, John. I'm still paying.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm having so much fun, and so we haven't just limited this to officiating, which is really, really good, and your input is awesome. Brian and I will have a great deal of discussion about this after we hang up the phone here too. Believe me. So yeah, good, bad, or indifferent. But so we know that the industry is changing. So Brian, you talk about the 100X he already has, you know what I mean? And we had that took the 220 and a half, 73 and a half to make the finals. L3 was a 218, 72.6 average to make the finals. The L2, the 100 entries, 212. Phenomenal bunch of horses. The shows they've changed so much, John and Brian, since we started this deal when we were going. And, well, I can't necessarily say that we go to Willowbrook, there might be 100 trying to go judge Willowbrook. There might be 100 in the limited non-pro class there too, right? So it would be an all-day affair. And so, class sizes probably at certain shows haven't changed that much. But it seems like today's shows, and this goes along with the officiating too, heck, they're 2 weeks, 10, 12, 14, 15 days. So you got guys sitting in the chairs long periods of time. So let me ask you this, because money is near and dear to everyone's heart, and there's no standard for officials to get to make money. And I laughed at this the other day because I had some friends that were going to go watch the Oklahoma State Cowboys play OU in the Bedlam football game, and they said they were going to go try and buy some tickets. Well, they were $900 for this college game, so they said, no, I think we'll go to the bar and watch it on TV. That same time that game is playing, I have to go to the Oklahoma World Show and judge the Reinings, which weren't bad because it's about 2 hours worth of work, but they paid $600 a day at the AQHA World Show. So I told Amy, I said, guess what? I said, people were spending more to go to the game than I got paid to stay away from it, for crying out loud. So for the same time frame. So do you think that there should be a standard for judges' fees? And now Brian and I have carped about this, and I'll say one more thing, because horse shows use it as a source of revenue. You understand? Judges' fees, if you do the math and look at judges' fees, they make huge amounts of money on judges' fees. The judges don't get paid. They stick that in the bank. So is there a way to standardize that? Is there a way to...
First of all, two things, Jody. I spent just enough time in Oklahoma to learn why all the good football players went to OU instead of OSU.
Right.
Because it's easier to spell.
Yeah. Amen. Right, exactly. Yeah, so I'm in complete agreement. Yeah, right.
Okay, other than last week, anyway. It used to embarrass me sometimes when you go and judge and back in the day, and you were the only one drawing a check on the fairgrounds. The guy driving the drag tractor was a volunteer, and,
right, exactly.
And the show secretary was a volunteer, and and you were drawing a check for $150 or whatever it was back then. We don't do a lot of volunteers now. And
no.
I think you're going to have to keep. I don't know what the number is because I'm too far out of it, Jody, to know what the number is. But there's a number where it's worth your time to not just go and do the job, but to prepare to do the job, to get yourself right mentally and physically, and there in plenty of time, and all of the things you do if it really, really mattered to you, that you probably aren't going to do if you're not, if the remuneration's not. Can't allow you to take that extra time. The second thing is when you're judging the major events, and I don't know what even would qualify as a major event now. I mean, but big stuff. There's enough of that going around that we may well be at the place where we can start to think about how do you develop a team of people who can do this ongoingly and have it be significant enough income that it represents being a job as opposed to being something you do on the weekend. And I mean, I don't know whether we're there yet or not, but that might be a goal to get to. Because I think that would be really good.
We've had extensive discussion about that. Yeah.
I would tell you we are there. I would as an industry we are there, John. So that's the answer. And I think you're hitting a big one because not only do you need to be the skill and craftsmanship of doing your best every time you're paid to do work is the piece that we're missing. And if it mattered was your statement. And it doesn't matter because they just want to get through
you're
it.
surviving.
They want to be safe. Yeah. And they don't want to.
Right.
Yes, that's all you're doing. That's all we're doing. And the numbers say it at the top end of our sport. And you've made me think about this completely different because changing the system as opposed to making it better, that's pretty powerful. And so there's some cool stuff. But the answer is we're there, which is Jody's point about an independent officiating system. I'm going to make it really simple. In all advanced professional sports, there is a very clear wall between officials and competitors. In our sport, that is still so gray and so clouded and so mismatched that it creates behavior on both sides of the equation that nobody wants.
I mean, I don't know whether I know you guys have had this experience. The worst thing in the world is judging your best friends. I mean, that is just, it's horrible. And, this is a family at some level. So you're judging your family at some place. So I think, the next professional step in this, that's part of the look is, how do you get people involved? How do you graduate them through it? And if you could make this a full-time job, can you imagine what you could do in terms of your development as a judge and you're being ready to judge and make those evaluations if it was a full-time gig? It'd be very interesting to me.
For sure. No, I couldn't agree more. I think that, Brian and I have had this discussion many, many times, and it's time for it. I laugh and I talk about this because that, the judging is something that people would do. Like, say, I would always like to go judge a horse show. I might only be able to do 2 or 3 a year because I had a barn full of horses. And I think, the older you get, that's more that you can pass on that expertise. You can do that without having to ride that barn full of horses. So it's good. But, it needs to pay with the level of skill and the years that you put into it. I laugh because I said my plumber charges me $100 an hour. I might go to a horse show and get paid 50, right? If my 45 years worth of experience is not worth as much as my plumber's, is charging me to come and fix my toilet. Right. But it's interesting, but yeah, I think, you have Major League Baseball umpires, you have NBA officials, you have NFL referees, and different groups of these guys are, stay in the same parts of the country, or they work together constantly, and I think they have a standardized, probably pay scale for them. I'm not sure, but I would bet that they do, and it's probably time, I think, for us to do the same thing.
One thing for sure, the Cowboys and the Bears aren't talking about who's going to officiate their game.
No, they're only talking about whether or not they did a fundamentally good job or after the game. Then they want somebody's hide. They actually expect that the officiating will be done as well as they're going to try.
And fair enough if you're an official. Fair enough. It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But,
Yep.
I don't know about what's in your country, but in Canada, some people don't even like the politicians occasionally. It just kind of comes with the territory.
Yes, go figure, right? No, I think everybody in America loves our politicians, right?
I figured that.
Yeah. We're neighbors. We're the same.
Exactly. So no, that's very interesting, and I can speak to this because it's absolutely true too. From you've chaired that committee, you know what it's like, and when you have, and look, don't get me wrong here, our members of our Judges Committee are excellent. They're good at what they do, and they're supposed to be as good as we've got. Otherwise, they shouldn't be on the Judges Committee. But when you empower the members of the Judges Committee to appoint themselves to do major events, that's a conflict. And it always has been. And I had to spend some time when I chaired that, and I would have to put the override on it, say now we're not having that many of our Judges Committee members marking major events, because no matter what, you have other Judges Committee members showing to you, right? When you're sitting in the chair. So anyway, it's a catch-22.
Well, let me jump on this one a touch, John, and then you can come in, because I differ just a touch. Do I think there's a bunch of really good people that have a lot of knowledge and insight in our officiating system? The answer is yes. Are they highly experienced at being a committee and being a regulatory body for a sport and an organization? I would tell you no. And then the vested interest, which is, hang on, because being the regulatory function and setting policies and procedures for the committee to go have the officiating done at our World Series, which is the Fraternity and the Derby, and they're more interested in being in the chair themselves so that they can get the check, that's where it's all messed up. Now,
good luck with this one, Cowboy. Woohoo!
So, but do you have any kind of like a firm opinion?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
think there's a couple of things, and we've all lived pieces of that, right? Yep. And if you had the magic wand to hire judges for those events, and you're thinking a couple of years ahead, you're putting people in places to kind of work their way through, and you got somebody who you think is going to be great in 2 years, and you're able to develop them. That's kind of not what a committee does. It's hard to make a committee think that far out. It's also, I think one of the problems that we have with committees is they tend to be, Judges Committee is guilty of this as anybody, is they tend to be like-minded. And the more they meet, the more like-minded they get. And you lack a diversity of life skills and impressions and ideas and all that sort of stuff. So that's always a chronic challenge. And I don't know. I do know that when you have a conflict of interest that's rather obvious, then that's a conflict of interest.
It is. And maybe this is not a, this is again fact. It's not a, and it's, I've had some interesting conversations with committee members about this, because we'd have, say maybe I'd have a member that was appointed, back in our day or past, the chair of the committee would appoint his Judges Committee members. Well, now it's the board of directors that can appoint a member. The president can always appoint a member. They'll say, okay, this person's going to come on, and you just like, okay, well, it's fine. Come on, bring it. So I've had some situations that a judges committee will go through the people that turn their names in. Everybody's making a list. They go through it. You have the conversations about them, which can be long, drawn-out affairs. But a name will come up, and someone will say, nope, not ready, not ready, not ready, not ready. Well, then suddenly, maybe a year down the road or 2 years down the road, that one of those 50 people that would make a list would be appointed to judges committee, and suddenly that person would be in a major event chair. So because judges committee would put them in that major event chair. Now, this is the same person that they said, no, all of a sudden they're on committee. Yep, okay. So you know what? That's conflict in itself. That person was just as good a judge 2 years ago that you said no to, that now is on committee that you say yes to. So, there's no easy part of it. It's been done, that way since probably when? 1960? So who decided who was going to judge what, right? So anyway, interesting.
I don't know. There are people who historically, Jody, will tell you that it was an old boys club back in the 80s. Don't know if that's true or not, but at least you could tell who was in charge.
Right.
If nothing else, you knew who you were mad at.
Yeah, exactly. That's really funny.
But I think those are governance issues, and everybody has governance issues, and nobody's got it just perfect. And the thing that encourages you is when you think people's hearts are aligned, that they're trying to get to the same place, that they're in this for the same reasons. And you would hope that would be easier as, back in the 70s, it was about survival.
Right.
We're past that point now. So hopefully it's about advancing this art form that's important to people. And by the way, the shape of our hats, that's important to people too. It's important that there's some traditions there that matter. So maybe more now than ever. So that's the kind of alignment that you need to have, and it's not easy to find.
So that like-minded people thinking alike, and sometimes that needs to be changed. You did something amazing in 2 years' time, which will probably never happen like that again, right? I mean, you're never going to go from this scoring system in this short a time frame. The changes, I think, the more money that's up, the slower the wheels are probably going to turn. But like I said, that changing the way those like-minded people think alike, those governance issues, right? Is that, like I said, here again, is it better off being outside of any association's hands or not? I mean, that's just my yes or no question, I guess.
I think that when you look at developing expertise, the wider the body you can do it in, the better. I mean, in terms of like expertise for judges, for example, there's reasons why you want to do that across a bigger spectrum than just the reining horse.
Right.
Right. And I don't need to go into that.
Right. No. Well,
the
nothing fails.
Problem,
Yeah, nothing fails like success.
success.
Right, and we're doing so well right now. And there again, is anyone going to say, no, we're going to leave it just like it is because, we'd rather stay here. So
I would make this one argument that's useful to keep in mind when you're thinking about this, and that is the faster and bigger it is, the more likely it is to work.
The faster and bigger it is, the more likely it is to work.
If you have a change, not an improvement, but a change, something that you're changing dramatically, unless you do it quickly, the resistance builds to it and it fails.
Good point.
So you got to move with some velocity, which means you got to have some confidence in what, and then you've got to be able to, kind of fix it while you go.
The rest of that question is the catalyst to doing that is some piece of the failure of success. Something's got to show up significant in order to make that change.
You got to be willing to put at risk the success you've been for the possibility you are. And that's the challenge.
Got it.
Interesting. Yeah, good. Great point, though.
It is. It is. Well, John, could you see the industry where it is today?
No, I mean, I don't. I think we hoped, but I think it's gone past the dreams of the people in the 1980s, 1970s. I don't think any of us thought horses could do what they're doing now, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, obviously, but you think about, well, just look at, other than probably Rick Weaver, who has always been 5 steps ahead of me in all of life, but it's phenomenal, and the amount of money these horses can make, the quality of them, the number of people that can ride one. That's pretty amazing. The importance of it, though, I would have said that I thought it was really important in 1980, and now I've been away from it for a while, in my day-to-day business, and I think it's more important. I think that what people do with that connection with horses, I think what people do with what's underneath these things, I think that's more important to our culture and our society going forward than it was 40 years ago. So I didn't see that coming either.
That's amazing. I had a little questionnaire sent to me since I went to do some part-time work for Oklahoma State University with the equestrian team. I had someone who works for the NCEA send me some questions because going in and being a specific reining coach for that part of the team. And she said, what is the biggest changes you've seen in the last 30 years? And I said exactly the same thing. Number one, you can't swim outside the gene pool, and it's the improvements, and not just in the reiners, but in the cow horses and the cutters and that the breeders have done by breeding specifically for this event. It's crazy. Techniques change, but these things are so much easier to train than a BH Enterprise was, back in 1984 or 85. It's like there's just no comparison. That was, that's one of the biggest things. And then she also asked, what's the biggest changes that you've seen in the reining horse business? I said, well, back in the late 80s and early 90s, Europe exploded because the Western style of cowboy riding, we shipped. We made so much money sending, broke horses to Europe, to the Italians, and to the Germans, and to the Swiss. They loved it. And I thought, it will never happen again. We'll never have that explosion. And people try to develop Japan and Brazil and China. Never worked. I didn't know a guy named Taylor Sheridan would come along and cause exactly the same thing to happen, only in a larger scale. So... Go ahead.
And what happened was already there. So there's something about the reining horses, about performance horses, about cutting horses, and there's something about stock horses that's already there for people. We're ringing a bell that already rings inside them.
Right.
Winston Churchill said there's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a man. There is a unique piece of that is this Western heritage. And even, kind of dumb guys from Ontario can get bit by that bug.
Anybody can get bit by that bug. We've been a strong proponent of that. So, and that just brings us to using technology in a different light for our world to make our world more readily accessible to others. Yes.
Fantastic.
So, well, John, is there anything that we haven't? Jody, you got any questions that we haven't?
No, but I'll think of them when we hang up the phone here. I've just enjoyed the heck out of this, and John, it's when we're doing this, technology allows us to do this, but it would still be okay for the three of us to meet somewhere and have a glass of wine and eat a steak too, and do this in real time.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I had to kind of wander, as I told you before, I wandered up Oswald Road, a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't been on that road for a long time. And I said, it won't be that long before I come back. So I'll take you up on that. Did you say that you were paying for that steak and wine? Brian, did I hear that right? Or?
Yeah, if I got you here, I would do that. Yes.
Yes, you did.
Fact,
okay.
Yeah.
If we go to Oklahoma and we all gather up, then Jody's
Perfect.
buying.
I'm in.
That's correct.
I'm in. Is tomorrow okay?
What was Bill's little bar down the road there, the pool hall?
Yeah, Gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of that place, but a couple of those boys got thrown out of there one day because they woke up Hatch when they upset the pool table. Nobody cared about the pool table, but they woke Hatch up. So
He was under it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
So
I
now-
do remember that bar.
Yeah,
John-
I have had a blast.
John, is there
No, listen, I
anything
think
from
you
your-
guys are doing a great thing here, and I watched some of your episodes and I've been watching them because I think you kind of got the right balance here about let's look at this and see how we can make it better and look at and analyze what's going on and try to see that with fresh eyes. I think it's wonderful. I thank you for inviting me on. I was deeply honored to be on here with you, and I really like what you're doing.
Thank you, John. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah.
Yep. We can't say thank you enough, John. Obviously Jody and I and you go way back, and so we've all known each other for a long time. But to get some of this information, you quoted Churchill. I'm not sure who is the proper author to, but they say if you don't study history, it will repeat itself. And so one of the things Jody and I we've got a little bit more time now these days in our life, and how can we use technology to at least leave some of this information and history in its place so that others, you don't have to ride that horse that hard. I'm using a dorky analogy, but I'm now speaking about an industry that's gone places that nobody could even fathom. So here we are. So I can't say thank you enough. I really appreciate it. It is great visiting with you as always. And thank you for being ahead of your time in your 20s in 1985. So on behalf of the entire industry, thank you. B1, page 96, authored by John.
Thanks, guys. I'm looking forward to that steak.
John, my friend, stay in the middle. That's what I'm going to tell you to do. And thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you right here in Oklahoma.
Night, guys.
All right. Goodbye now. Thank you.
Be good, John. Enjoy the ride.
Today's episode is brought to you by 4D Productions in cooperation with the Consultment Agency, a full-service agency that helps bring forward-thinking equine brands into the 21st century using digital skills and services such as website development, graphic design, social media, and media production such as the podcast you're consuming here today. Thank you so much for riding along with us today. Sign up at cowboyoffice.com to be the first to know about topics affecting the industry we love so much. You can reach out to us with topics you care about by finding us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. And remember, share this episode with someone that may enjoy it, because the more we can share our horses with others, the better our world will be.